Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi there, and welcome to episode 260 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on what is acceptance and commitment therapy. And it is the 6th of April 2024 as I record this. So the reason why I actually wanted to do today's episode was because acceptance and commitment therapy is something that I often hear about. It's something that I often sort of cover in clinical psychology lectures, and I've heard about it in clinical psychology books. But before now, I've never actually explored it in any great depth. So this really interesting podcast episode delves into what is acceptance and commitment therapy. How does it work? When is it used? And more. So this is a great episode that I really enjoyed. So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is a little odd. Visual-vestibular stimulation assists out-of-body illusions. People who have had an out-of-body experience report the sensation of leaving their physical body and floating up above it. Many also say that their point of view shifts, so that they look down at their bodies for a period of time before re-entering it. While some take a more mystical approach to these experiences, researchers have linked them to problems with the vestibular system, a suite of organs in the inner ear that are sensitive to the direction of the pull of gravity and also to head movement, helping us sense when we're moving. The vestibular signals are also thought to be important for the feeling that our conscious self is located in our physical body, though senses such as vision contribute to this too. In a recent study in Eye Science, Hei-Sing Wu and colleagues explore how out-of-body experiences might come about, reporting a technique which stimulates both visual and vestibular systems to create an illusion of out-of-body experiences in healthy people. Okay, so there's not exactly too much I can say about this one. There's two things that I can say. One, I think this is really interesting, and this is quite a brilliant way to research it, and actually, it's a really good example of like when we've got the theoretical information, and then how do you experiment on it practically. So this, I think, is actually quite brilliant. It's quite interesting. I think it would be scary as hell to actually experience this, or at least it'd be interesting to say the least. But I think this would have to be really weird. I always remember the vestibular system because of one lecture I had in my final year of my undergrad on my cognition in action module. It was a gravity lecture. Now, there are a lot of lectures I've had. I've had well over 100 or 200 through my undergrad and my master's. And there are some lectures that just stick with you because they are so interesting, and some of them are just really weird, and some of them are just horrific. This was probably a cross between interesting and horrific because of the lecturer, to be honest. So gravity, I think, is a very interesting one, especially because it's interesting how they research it and all the research problems that can actually be experienced by researchers. Because until we get into space travel, really, there's no good proper way to actually test gravity's impact on human behaviour. But it's interesting, and the vestibular system plays a very important role when it comes to gravity, because gravity really does impact it. So I'll definitely do some content on that in the future. So I have all my reading and all my lecture notes. But it was one of the more interesting topics in cognitive psychology. So the second one is, it's down to you to be more reflective around screen use. Editor for The Psychologist, John Sutton, recently chatted with Penny X, author of Unlocked, The Real Signs of Screen Time and How to Spend It Better. In their egg exchange, they touched on the value of carefully conducted research, especially when it pertains to technology usage. Open quote. I think Goldberg literally invented internet addiction as a joke in 1995 to sanitize how easy it is to problematize everyday behaviors. It backfired. Everyone started going, that sounds like me, and self-organizing internet addiction groups cropped up on the internet. A few years later, researchers started saying, everyone's talking about this internet addiction thing. We should look at it. The first major study on this was by Kimberly Young back in 1998, and she created this internet addiction scale based on gambling addiction. If you went on Google and searched for internet addiction, a link to her study would crop up. So you find this study, self-report your internet addiction tendencies, and you've got the age of internet addiction. Then everybody goes to the same study with slight tweaks, and we'll go about pretending that there's a big body of convergent evidence. At no point has anyone asked, hang on, what's the theory here? Close quote. Oh my god, okay. When I finally get round to reading my psychologist issues, I think I've got 5 months worth. I'm so reading this. This sounds amazing. Because I mean, like, this is what I'm thinking, to be honest. Like, and when people talk about video game addiction, internet addiction, and just everything, she popped up today in my family, and I just shook my head, to be honest. Like, I didn't want to get into this big psychology debate or argument, but I mean, like, my point of view on all of this is quite literally that, are we just pathologizing everyday behaviors which are normal in this current time period, but they weren't a few decades ago, or to be honest, even 1 or 2 decades ago. They weren't as much of a major thing, though, simply because societies change, and people thinking, oh, because society's changed, that's a bad thing. There must be a problem here, though, but there must be a new problem that didn't exist before. I think interviews like this are very interesting. I love this debate. I love talking about this stuff. And yeah, I mean, like, I think this woman's just hit the nail on the head. Head over. And I think that this is another point about research, is that this is when we've always got to make sure that research has theoretical backing that is evidence-based. It's interesting, it's definitely food for thought. And yeah, I mean, like, we've got to sort out this research problem when it comes to this internet addiction, because is internet addiction actually real? Or is it something that we've made up basically because someone joked about it and everyone thinks they identify with that problem? I think that's very interesting indeed. Now, for the last one, I would do this electroconvulsive therapy one, but this is a very supportive argument of electroconvulsive therapy. I completely disagree with it, and if you want to see the truth about electroconvulsive therapy and why it doesn't work, then please check out Moncrief and Reed 2022. It's an amazing paper. I do not say that about academic papers often, but it's an amazing paper. I love those two. Moncrief is amazing. So definitely check out that academic paper. So instead, the last one is, elsewhere on the web. Are you good at tennis? Maybe a pro at a first-person shooter. you may see more images a second, according to new research reported here in The Guardian. Open quote. The research published in PLOS ONE found that some people reported a high source as a constant when it was in fact flashing about 35 times a second, whilst others could still detect flashes at a rate greater than 60 times a second. Closer quote. Whilst that's actually a decent temporal resolution, other animals still have a human's beat. Falcons, for example, see 100 visual frames a second. So the only thing that I can actually say about that one, besides from how interesting, is that as much as I keep saying I'm not a cognitive psychology person, even though time and time again that's been proven to be an utter lie, I think perception is one of those small areas of cognitive psychology that can be really interesting, because it does touch on quite a few other topics. For example, I think neuroplasticity will actually play a quite large role in like the perception differences, because if you keep testing your brain with tennis or first-person shooter games, so you've actually got to start having a better perception and better reaction times, then your brain is going to adapt to that. So I think that that's interesting, and I think that is just a really good way of actually showing that your biology and your brain can actually impact behavior. Of course, biology is never, ever always the answer to behavior. In fact, I hope on this podcast I've proven the exact opposite, that biology is behavior, because most of the time it isn't. I think that it's interesting not to dismiss that biology and our physical body does have a role to play in our behavior. So interesting. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So moving on to the personal update. So I've no doubt this is going to be a bit of an extended personal update, but I promise this is going to be very relevant, interesting, and useful to all of you. So this week has been very busy for quite a few different reasons, but let me start at the university stuff. So I imagine this is the same for most of the Western world, but in the UK, the university term has finished. So but the spring term is officially over, and we're all on now Easter break, which is going to last a month, which I'm really happy with. And it actually got me thinking, so this time last year, I basically just finished my undergrad with my exams, just coming up in May, and plus I'd also just submitted my final year project, which I think is quite interesting to think about how far I've come in a year, and also, just what has happened in a year, which means I'm going to do more in August and September, because then it will be a proper year. And I think it's quite interesting to know how much has happened in a year, and also where I am in my life now, and also just my masters. Like I'm halfway through my part-time masters. I've got a lot of good stuff happening in September, like it's just quite weird to realize it though, like just how far that I have come. Of course, I've still got tons of data analysis to do because I've got to do thematic analysis and correlations for my clothing study, which I'm really excited about. And I've been doing the codes, and the lovely thing about thematic analysis is that it is interesting because you get to read tons of responses, but after a while, and this is actually a very good thing, it does get a bit boring after a while when you're reading 89 of the responses to the same question. Because after a while, everyone starts saying the same thing, and it gets really, really dull. But that's also quite good because it means your codes and your themes are going to be really valid. So I do quite like that, and so I've got about another 7 questions to thematically analyze. Then I've got about, I don't know, got the three mental health scales, so I've got to calculate everyone's scores, and then I've got to do correlations. I've got a lot to do there. I've also got to do a lot of statistics revision, because even though on the practice test I'm doing quite well, I wouldn't exactly say I understand too much of it, like path analysis, confirmatory factor analysis, item response theory, etc., etc. There's a lot to revise. Like there's 10 topics, quite advanced stuff. So it's interesting. Like, do not get me wrong. This stat stuff can actually be quite interesting. I mean, it's just a lot to revise, especially because my exams are halfway through May. So I'll be fine, hopefully. Hopefully, though, it's just there's a lot to do. So I'm just chipping away at it a little bit each day. And then also, I've been doing a lot of outreach work like this week. So I've spent two raffle birthdays with year six students. So, year six students, they're about 11 years old, though, because they're going to be starting year seven. So, that's our secondary school here in the UK. I think Americans call that junior high. No, but I think they call it high school. One day I probably should familiarise myself with education systems of other countries. So but they be doing different activities to like socialise, make friends, and just like get to know the school a bit more though. So that was like really good, very social. But yeah, the final bit of interesting news that I actually wanted to tell you is that I'm officially got a job promotion at my university. So I'm now a postgraduate ambassador, which is really interesting and really exciting and really relevant because I study psychology and because I'm a postgrad ambassador, I now get to develop and actually teach psychology sessions um, representing the university. So, as a postgrad ambassador, whenever there's a event on, or whenever a school reaches out to my university and say, "Hey, we want a psychology session, talk to our students. Do you have any?" Well, then the university can like contact me and say, "Hey, a school wants a psychology session delivered. Can you do it for us?" I would have, of course, say yes because the pay is very good and I do like it. But to demonstrate like what actually in like those, I just wanted to show you the two ideas that I came up with for my interview. So what happened was that for my interview, I had to come up with an activity for year 10 students and year 12 students. Turned out it was either or, but that didn't matter. I did one for both. So for year 10 students, so around 15-year-old students, and because my university does a Future of Human Day, so basically, how can humans live forever? I took the psychology aspect of digital immortality. So basically, how could digital immortality, which is a psychology topic because of personality, consciousness, and memories, basically, how could that allow us to live forever? So I would develop an entire session about that. But then for my year track like activity though, well, what I would do is I would do a subject taster, so basically a mock psychology lecture slash seminar. It turned out from what one of the interviewers mentioned, basically an introduction to animal assisted psychotherapy based on the podcast episode last month. Because that would be really fun though, because all year 12 students are about like 17 years old, but they're all into animals, they're all into psychology, and it would be a really good way to sort of introduce them to what a lecture's like, but also what a seminar's like in terms of the like conversations and just some of the discussions that we could possibly have though. So it'd be like a lot of fun. I would love to develop these sessions and I would love to actually teach them. And I think that's quite likely. Plus, also being a postgrad ambassador would mean that I actually get to do one on one mentoring with A level students, which is the 16 to 18 education system in the UK that the majority of colleges do. So, really good stuff. I'm really excited that I've got that job promotion. It's going to be a lot of fun in the future. And then I've got a few other interviews for other possible job promotions or within outreach, being a student ambassador, which also includes lead ambassador. So I would be in charge of like running days for the university, which I've got the interview for that on Monday. So hopefully I'll get that. And then I've also got a year 10 residential interview on Friday, which is basically 3 days of looking after year 10 students whilst they experience university life and just I have no idea, to be honest. I just saw it. It sounded fun, so I wanted to do it. Yep, and then there's one more though. So very exciting things are happening, and I'm really pleased. And to be honest, the reason why I'm telling all of you this is basically because one of the training sessions that I have to do for this postgrad ambassador is basically the psychology of teaching. So there might be some content coming up based on what I learned, because the psychology of teaching is actually a lot more interesting than it sounds, and I think I'm going to enjoy that quite a lot. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwiley@connorwiley.net. You can always leave a comment out of the show notes at connorwiley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi wiley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Cognitive Psychology, a guide to neuroscience, neuropsychology, and cognitive psychology. So, this is a great sponsor for today's episode because acceptance and commitment therapy comes from CBT, so cognitive behavioural therapy, which focuses on mental processes and helping you to accept yourself and commit to behavioural change. So this cognitive psychology books help you to understand what is cognitive psychology, how do our mental processes impact our behavior, like our memory, our thinking biases, perception, attention, and so many more brilliant cognitive psychology areas. This is like a great book. It's really popular. I always enjoy reading it and also promoting it because readers really do enjoy this book and they get a lot of value from it. So that's Cognitive Psychology, a guide to neuropsychology, neuroscience, and cognitive psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore, or local library if you request it. So, whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the show, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And if you wanted to become a patron of the show and get tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/the Psychology World podcast. So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content parts of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what is acceptance and commitment therapy, also known as ACT, which is what I'm going to be calling it, simply because that's the acronym and it's a lot easier to say in audio. So acceptance and commitment therapy is a therapy stemming from the more traditional behavioural and cognitive behavioural therapies, since ACT is an action-oriented approach to therapy because it gets the client to stop denying, struggling, and avoiding their inner emotions. Instead, the therapy gets the client to accept the deeper feelings as appropriate responses in a given situation that they shouldn't prevent themselves from experiencing, because trying to stop these responses stops the client from moving forward in their lives. As a result, Acceptance and commitment therapy gives the client an understanding that they need to begin accepting their mental health difficulties and commit to making the needed changes in their behaviour, regardless of what's going on in their lives and how they feel about it. Personally, I really like the sound of ACT because I think that all therapies need a touch of this to be successful. Since if you take cognitive behavioural therapy for example, we need a client to accept that their depression, anxiety, whatever, can't actually be cured. But if they commit to the therapy and have a capacity for change, then they can develop adaptive coping mechanisms that will decrease their psychological distress and improve their lives. So I could argue that the idea of acceptance and commitment is an undertone in all psychotherapies, but this one just focuses on it more. In addition, in the 1980s, psychologist Stephen C. Hayes from the University of Nevada developed ACT based on his own experiences. Since the professor had a history of panic attacks, promised himself he would no longer run from himself. Instead, he would accept himself and his experiences. How does ACT work? From a theoretical perspective, ACT works because it is counterproductive for a client to try and to control their painful emotions and their psychological experiences, as well as it is the suppression of those feelings that leads the client to experience even more distress. As a result, ACT proposes that a client needs to develop the belief system that there are valid alternatives, trying to change the way they think, including mindful behavior, a commitment to action, and attention to personal values. This leads to taking steps to change their behavior to decrease their psychological distress. But the client is still learning to accept their psychological experiences at the same level. This eventually leads to the client changing their emotional states and attitudes. What should a client expect from ACT? Building upon this further, when a client works with a therapist for this type of psychotherapy, the client will learn to listen to their own self-talk, and this includes how they talk about problematic relationships, traumatic events, physical limitations, and other challenges. Then it is up to the client to decide if a problem requires any immediate action or a change, or if the problem can be accepted for what it is, whilst the client learns to make the behavioural changes to modify the situation. To do this, a client might have a look at their past to see what has or hasn't worked for them, and the therapist can help the client stop repeating the same thought patterns and behaviours as the past, so they don't cause more problems in the future. Additionally, after a client has faced and accepted their current challenges, the client must make a commitment to stop fighting the past and their emotions. Instead, the client can start practicing more optimistic as well as confident behaviour based on their personal values and goals. Ultimately, ACT aims to provide a person with psychological flexibility, a concept that encompasses emotional openness and the ability to adapt their behaviours and thoughts to better align with the client's own goals and values. Personally, I really like the idea of psychological flexibility and a lot of what ACT aims to do, since being flexible in the way we think and feel in a given situation is critical to our mental health, because we can't be strict and inflexible. So what we can only feel a certain way in a given situation, because this will make us feel awful and experience a lot of distress. Yet, if we start to explore other ways to make us feel slightly better, then that will definitely improve our mental health over time if we accept and commit in changing our thoughts and behaviour. And just as a little funny personal example, is that because I have a friend that I really want to date and everything, I asked them out and they said no, which is fair enough. And we're both very open about the fact that I like them. Yet, whenever they talk about that they're dating or they're seeing someone, I used to feel utter rubbish. And I had some really bad thoughts about myself. However, this wasn't helping. So over time, I've taught myself to think in other ways, accept how bad I feel, and I've committed to taking small steps to change certain aspects of my life, like trying to meet other people. And I know this isn't like a professional act whatsoever, but what I'm trying to say is that these concepts are useful even outside of therapy. Moreover, there are 6 core processes used in ACT to promote psychological flexibility. Acceptance. This is a core process involves the client acknowledging as well as embracing the full range of their emotions and thoughts rather than trying to deny, change, or avoid them. Being present. This core process comes from mindfulness, in the sense that a client should try to be mindful in the present moment so the client can observe their feelings and thoughts without judging them or trying to change them. Instead, the client should experience events clearly, and this can directly help them to promote behavioural change. Cognitive diffusion. Thirdly, cognitive diffusion involves a client distancing themselves from their distressing thoughts and feelings, as well as changing the way they react to them. This decreases their harmful effects. Also, some ways how this diffusion is done includes singing the thought, labeling the automatic response the client has to them, and observing a thought without judgment. Values. Fourthly, values are important for developing psychological flexibility because this encompasses a client's choosing personal values in different domains of their life and trying as hard as they can to live according to these principles. Now, this is interesting because it is in direct contrast to when a client's actions are being driven by their desire to avoid distress or to adhere to other people's expectations. Self as a context. Ultimately, self as a context is the idea that expands the notion of the self and identity, as it proposes that people are more than their feelings, experiences, and thoughts. Something that I completely agree with because it is true. We are way more than our past, our thoughts, and how we feel in a given moment. Committed action. Finally, committed action involves a client taking concrete steps to incorporate changes into their life that will align with their values and lead to a positive changes. For example, the client could do some ghost setting, school development, or expose themselves to different thoughts and experiences. When is ACT used? Lastly, ACT is a useful therapy for a wide range of mental as well as physical conditions. For example, depression, anxiety disorders, psychosis, eating disorders, workplace stress, chronic pain, substance abuse disorders, and obsessive compulsive disorders. Conclusion. So I have to admit I've rather liked this podcast episode because I've heard a lot about ACT over the years through my lectures, but it is only now that I'm starting to learn about the therapy in any great depth. And I know I say this a lot in a lot of these therapy-based podcast episodes, but I think a lot of these concepts can be transplanted into other therapies too. For example, the idea of getting your client to accept that their experiences aren't something to be avoided, cured, or ashamed of, that is nothing new. And I know that a large part of cognitive behavioural therapy, and I know that this is a large part of the cognitive behavioural therapy, which is where this therapy stems from in the first place. Equally, getting a client to commit to taking actionable and concrete steps to improve their lives. Again, I don't exactly think that's anything new. Surely that is the same as a client having a capacity to change. Therefore, if you like the idea of acceptance and a commitment, but you don't actually practice ACT, then maybe I think about incorporating these concepts into your own practice in the future. It's just an idea, but I know it's something interesting to think about. What do you think? So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did because I always like looking at different forms of psychotherapy, especially when it's one that I've learned quite a lot about in my lectures and I've touched on tons of different times, but I've never actually looked in it into any great depth though. So today was a great introduction to what ACT actually involves. So if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out Cognitive Psychology, a guide to neuroscience, neuropsychology, and cognitive psychology, available in all the usual places. And you can get the AI narrated audiobook version from selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and selected library systems. And if you want to become a patron of the show, now you can at patreon.com/The Psychology World Podcast. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.